Welcome back to Untethering Shame. Today, we're diving into the powerful, often challenging world of emotions and how understanding and regulating them can help us in the healing process. Joining me is Jennifer Ginty, a passionate advocate for mental health and founder of My Moody Monster, a project that she created to help both children and adults face their emotions rather than suppress or fear them. Jennifer's journey with Moody began during her own struggles with complex PTSD and major depressive disorder. Frustrated with how intense emotions often felt like obstacles, Jennifer imagined a way to externalize these feelings, wishing she could have a monster to channel her frustration and explore her emotions safely. That vision ultimately inspired My Moody Monster, which has now grown into a mission to help others better understand and manage big feelings, particularly those rooted in shame, guilt, depression, and anxiety. Jennifer believes strongly in starting these conversations with kids early, giving them tools to manage their emotions rather than bury or ignore them. Through Moody, she's opened doors for people of all ages to explore their emotions in a healthy way or a more adaptive way that helps in that overall process of evolution and healing. This isn't just about coping, but about learning to live with our emotions instead of feeling overpowered by or the need to run from them, a journey that she calls a love story to her healing. Today, we'll talk about why embracing our emotions is a fundamental step toward healing and self-compassion. Jennifer will share what emotion regulation can look like in practice and why it's crucial not only for our own mental health, but also for modeling these skills to our children and to other people in our lives, creating a space where we can all feel heard, respected, and validated. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. I feel like emotions are, well, I'll say this. As a survivor of my own complex PTSD and someone that probably could have gotten an A++++ in emotion suppression and avoidance, emotions were the thing that when I was getting my degree as a therapist, I was constantly being reminded to sit with them longer, to observe them, to not solve them, to not rush my clients through them, but to help them learn how to sit with them, which really helped me understand, oh, fuck, I don't know how to do this. So I've got to figure this out in a way that is deeper and more meaningful, because what I'm doing is actually just sitting in a state of suppression and detachment. And so I get really excited to talk with somebody whose, I guess, wheelhouse, we'll say, your expertise, like all of your energy is around, let's talk about this thing that is so natural, so important with us every day, and yet we're not talking about it enough. To kick us off, I'm curious if you could describe for all the listeners, how would you define an emotion? What is an emotion, and why do we need to be having more conversations about them?
Emotions give us an understanding of what's around us, what's happening in a situation, and how we're reacting to that situation. For anger, anger is a reaction to a threat. So when we receive that anger in our heads, we are reacting to something that could be a threat to us. And that's important for us to understand.
Mm-hmm.
All of these emotions are valid and we use them in some way. I myself use DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. And it was created for people with PTSD and to talk about emotions, all of them: happy, sad, angry, shame, all of the emotions that we feel. They're real, they're appropriate, and it's how we react to them and how society helps us understand them. That's the important part.
Well, and I think what you just said is the key piece, because what you're basically describing is that emotions are part of the human experience. I know I read the book Burnout years ago, and they talked about us being emotional beings who have thought, not logical beings who have emotions. And the idea basically, and I'm not getting their phrasing right, is that our emotions are actually the key thing that we have in our body, how we sense ourselves physically, emotionally, the way that we're feeling about the world around us is more important and often is informing the thoughts that we're having. But what you just said that's key, I think, is it's the reaction or the story or the judgment or the bias that gets placed on them by us or the world around them that has made them, I think, something we fear, something we avoid, something that we seek to, I guess, win. Like, I'm supposed to be happy, and so I have to achieve this rather than allowing it to happen. Why do you think we do that? Where does that come from? That we're just like, no, 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 these are actually good or bad. Not all of them fit. And they're only so helpful. And these ones can't be a part of the process. And you got to learn to stuff those. Why do we do that?
I think it's discomfort. I
Mm.
think that the ones that we consider, quote, negative are the most uncomfortable emotions that we feel. And society, in however many centuries, has decided which ones are appropriate to show, which are the
Mm.
appropriate ones to hide. And it's been through these centuries that we've learned what one to be excited about feeling and ones that you
Mhm.
want to run away from.
Well, and as you're saying that, I'm wondering, do you think there's a correlation between busyness or like hustle culture and our lack of comfort in feeling these emotions? Like, for me, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about, if I'm sad, it feels like I have to fix it to not be sad anymore so I can keep doing the things I'm supposed to do. If I'm mad, if I'm even just thinking about being sick, like, not an emotion. I mean, even though you might have other emotions, you might feel sad, depressed, whatever, as an association. It's like it's getting in the way of me doing something. I've even thought about this in the therapy room with clients where they're like, I shouldn't feel depressed anymore. Like, I need to get past this to keep doing this. Like, what's the progression? Why do I still feel this way? So do you think there's a correlation to that, to being a doing culture and our sort of intolerance to discomfort and these quote unquote negative feelings?
You know, it's funny. I had just recently spoken with my therapist about how I created a podcast to run away from my own feelings. I am constantly in need of moving, doing, to avoid the discomfort of sitting with emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, I don't know if it's come to the surface yet for you. Oftentimes, my discomfort in being in an emotional state that has been labeled to me, or I've absorbed the label from someone else that it's bad, it's negative, it's whatever it is. I can't give myself permission to feel it fully because I end up having shame, which we know is also an emotion, but shame basically takes over any of the other emotions right away. And it's like, you're somehow fucking up. You either haven't healed enough, you're not doing enough, you're a shitty, like, maybe I'm feeling frustrated or sad or overwhelmed as a parent. It's because you're a shitty parent and you don't know how to deal with this. And I like immediately feel these, what I know now are still beliefs I need to work through. They're not just thoughts. Like, I have taken them and decided they are fact, and they come up whenever these emotions come to play. And so I feel this urgency to like get through it as quickly as I can and to make sure that everything is neat and tidy and orderly, because there's this notion that if it's not, I'm going to be found out. Other people are going to see me as a failure. I'm not doing things good enough. I'm probably inconveniencing other people, which, as somebody that has learned to suppress as like a childhood safety mechanism, like, the last thing you would want is to inconvenience anybody else with your bullshit emotion that you should have figured out how to deal with on your own. And so it just like plays into itself. And then I don't deal with it. And then I end up getting to a place where I could no longer respond to it in a healthy way. But now I'm reacting in a way that only keeps me stuck in a feedback cycle of feeling more shame and blame and judgment and negative feelings because I didn't just give them their moment in the spotlight when they came up to begin with.
As you were talking, I started to step back a little just to get a wider picture.
Yeah.
And if you step back far enough, you notice that we live in a variety of societies. We have the entire society we live in as, let's say, like we live in our country as a
Mm.
society, but we also live in micro societies in our friendships, in our families, in school when we're young. We have these
Mm-hmm.
micro societies that we're living in and learning from. And it all depends on the societies that you're growing in that will teach you
Mm.
to either activate or suppress emotions. Think about think about, if you're in a family just like mine, I think my generation in general feels this way. We were taught not to show our emotions, to give discomfort to others.
Yes.
So don't be an angry girl. Don't
Mm-hmm.
upset grandma with your sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bother mom while she's making dinner.
Mm-hmm.
We're being told, don't be a bother with your
Right.
emotions, right?
Right.
And even at school, you know, a child who is acting out may be in need of help in some way
Mm-hmm.
and they're being suppressed. Don't interrupt the class, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
all these little micro societies that we're living in are teaching us how we're supposed to show our emotions, hide our emotions, just stuff them down. And that's how we've learned to live our lives with our
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, growing up, there was a moment, I don't remember what had happened. Something was going on. My mom had relapsed. She had struggled with pretty severe drug addiction before I was born, and she had relapsed when I was about 10. And I was living with my aunt and uncle at the time. And I don't remember what occurred, but something big with my mom. I don't know if it was that she had relapsed and was going back to a treatment center. She had been in and out of jail, so maybe she had been arrested again, but something to that effect. What I do remember was standing at the bar in my aunt and uncle's basement as they were getting ready for a party, telling my aunt how sad that I was. And my aunt telling me that was basically she was busy with the party and that I needed to learn how to put on a happy face because this was not a conversation that could be had. She was busy and she wasn't going to stop what she was doing, nor was she going to have it affect her party and sort of the presentation that she wanted to have to her party guests about how her family was and how we all engaged and all of these things. And I think it's interesting how often, like I even think about in school, when we were in high school, I feel like the term emo was used a lot for anybody that was quote unquote emotional or like not happy and constantly doing this like, frolicking sort of energy in the classroom or like perfectly still and listening to the teacher and not being a bother. And so there was this whole group of people that were likely actually experiencing their emotions and allowing them to show up and exist. And they were labeled as the problem because they were emotional, quote unquote, or dramatic, quote unquote, like all of these things that we were taught. And so, it's interesting. Not only am I thinking about what you just described as like the societies we grew up in and how it informed our relationship with our emotions or our lack of awareness around emotions, it's also interesting to think about trying to build a new society in your family home with your kids or other people you're influencing when the only sort of information to draw on are these societies that were teaching you sort of the opposite way of existing and how stressful that is and how hard that is because I'm like teaching my daughter how to process and feel her emotions. And at the same time, I'm still, as a therapist, as someone who's done therapy myself for over 15, 20 years, I'm still learning what emotion regulation looks like. I'm still learning how to not want to throw my own tantrum in the moment when I just want to say everybody else sucks and poor me and like flail and throw something across the room. And yet I'm expecting I'm going to be perfect in teaching my kid how to do this thing. And then when she can't, I'm upset at myself and feel like I am failing her in some way and afraid of what other people are going to think of her if she experiences her emotions, quote unquote, too loudly or too big in a public setting, which then is me in some ways perpetuating the same societal norms that I grew up in, maybe just not as bold or loud, but still in a way that is going to factor into how I'm showing up for my kid and teaching her how to do it too.
Well, it's very intergenerational. It's hard to break those generational curses, so to say, because we were taught by our own microcosm of family. Whatever they were taught was how they were willing to show up for their children.
Yeah.
Because maybe they think, well, that's just the way it happens. And think
Right.
about, there are also, in uh, different different families, like Italian families, and different ways that people have grown up in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody is learning from their culture. They're learning from their societies, and they're expressing themselves in the only way they know how.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's interesting a lot of the times having conversations with clients is, and we'll just keep using the parenting example for a second, because I feel like there's so much information now about how to gentle parent, how to do all of these things in a very specific way. And here's all these behavioral instructions on how to do that and what this looks like. Where I think we're missing the mark is having the conversation around our own emotional grief and healing and processing and our own stories, and recognizing that the accessibility to some of these skills is a much different route and road for some than it is to others. And so, because I think we don't talk about that gap of getting to this place where we could do these things, oftentimes the idea is, well, everyone should be able to do this. And the information is so accessible now with all the things on social media, the internet. So there's no excuse not to do those things, when in reality, even with all the training that I have and all of the healing that I've had the opportunity to do, I'm still not at a place where I could do that and feel confident that I could teach it in a way that I would say I'm an expert. And maybe I don't know that I'd ever get there, because I very much think it's a journey and there's always going to be new things that I'm going to be learning and struggling with. But I think for many people, that sort of lack of pause and understanding our own space and sort of the intergenerational transmission of pain, of detachment, of all of these different techniques, because we're not making that space, can make it really difficult for us to know how to heal. Instead, it's like we're just looking for Band-Aids, and then we're beating ourselves up that we should be able to handle things better, but we haven't even given any context to why we don't know how to do that yet.
Well, we don't give ourselves grace. Never.
True.
Never.
Yeah, wait, what is that? We're supposed to do that?
And this shit is hard.
Yeah. Yes.
I always tell people, especially parents, you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help your child. And
Right.
the way I see that is by building your own toolbox of coping skills.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot. It's a lot of work. And sometimes you don't want to do that work. Maybe sometimes the lizard brain of you just wants to react.
Yep.
And not step back in the moment.
Yes.
It's really hard to make that change, because you're changing your entire way of reaction. If we don't have that, how can we teach our children to do that? And then we put this pressure on ourselves. We're not giving our children what they deserve or need.
Right. Well, and I feel like for many people, again, this isn't to say that this is only if you have kids that you have, probably learned how to suppress, avoid. I think kids are just one really great mirror holder to be like, oh, this actually doesn't really work as well as you think it did. And it doesn't have to be kids. It could be a different relationship, a loss. There are so many different things that can trigger to us in our adult lives. You maybe have patterns of avoidance, emotion suppression, dysregulation that really haven't been working for you. Or maybe they did, but they no longer are, and an invitation to do the work. For me, I think a lot got brought up when my daughter was born, and probably some overlap with COVID and some other losses and traumas, but really recognizing that so much of my own fear and pain and unresolved anger towards my mom, things in my life growing up where I've told myself I should just be over it. I should be fine. I should be the strong one that can be okay. I wasn't ever okay. I just didn't have enough of a trigger to bring it fully to the surface in a way that was affecting me as big as it did as when I became a mom. And so I'm having to look at it and being like, I don't know how to do this, like you said, and I don't know how to give myself the grace for it because my expectation has always been that I should be fine and I should be able to keep moving. And I don't know how to be in a state where I can say, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm scared. I'm scared I'm getting it wrong. I'm scared I'm going to hurt my kid, not physically, but like, what if I can't give her everything she needs emotionally? What if I fuck up in an interaction, which I'm aware I'm going to, but in those really vulnerable states and the fear and the pressure to do it all, man, it's really hard to create space for that. And so it does feel like I just got to keep going and going and going and going and getting better and being, again, on the hunt for perfection in all of these roles, which is really just another version of suppression. I'm not actually dealing with my own stuff. I'm just running away from my discomfort and expecting somehow I'm going to be able to do it better because I watched Dr. Becky for an hour teach me about some way to communicate. I'm curious because we're talking about sort of the end state, and in this scenario up to this point, we're both recognizing, okay, look, we're here and this might be how we got here. But I'm curious for you because you're saying, you did a lot of suppression, avoidance. You had a lot of painful things that you went through. My guess is that you weren't always as aware as you are now about the depth of your emotional pain, the ways you were avoiding, suppressing. Where did you find that transition? Where did the light turn on for you of like, oh, I'm actually feeling all of these feelings. I'm not moving through them or somehow able to run from them or hide from them, whatever I've been trying to do. And if I don't turn and face them, I won't be okay. Where was that turning point for you?
If I can go back a bit to, the beginning of my story of, I lived for 14 years with my abuser and with my family. And when everything came out finally and my abuser was taken out of the home, I think a lot of people think that that's when trauma ends for
Mm-hmm.
someone. But actually, there are so many other traumas that happen after that. And it can be for different ways for different people. For me, it was going into the court system. They wanted to put my abuser in prison, but they wanted to do it their way. And they wanted us to bend to how they wanted to do it without dealing with the messiness of a teenager's emotions.
Yeah.
So, my brothers, they were older than me and they were better able to discuss what had happened to them by our abuser. And it took me a lot longer to open up about it. I didn't have the words, I couldn't communicate it, but I was feeling it. I was suffering with it. And when I was finally able to tell them what had happened with me, they didn't believe me.
Who's they when you say that? Like people in the court system?
Yeah, the DA, the guardian ad litem, all the different people who get involved in this. And they thought that maybe I was just wanting to be a part of
Mm-hmm.
something, which
Attention seeking in some way.
exactly, which no child wants to talk about their abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and they made me go in front of a grand jury and talk about
Oh,
very
fuck.
explicit sexual abuse. And by that time, I checked out. I was in high school. I just wanted to be a high school student. And when, it came up to time to actually see my abuser go to jail, that was 4 years of this constant back and forth with the DA and
Mm-hmm.
the fear of him just showing up in anger. Like there was so many different things that were happening. By the time he went to prison, I just didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to even know it. And so I stuffed it down and I would say, not yet. And, it was not yet. I'm going to college. And then
Mm.
not yet. I'm starting a career until it was finally not yet. I'm a mom. And there's no way I'm taking away time and energy from these beautiful new souls that I created.
Hmm.
That's so selfish of me, right? So I would just keep pushing it off and pushing it off until finally I owned a boutique in my town and I had to close the boutique and go into bankruptcy. And that's when it hit me. I lost an identity and, like, as this person in society. And my brain finally said, right now, the brain fog came in, the tiredness,
Mhm.
the conflict in relationships. It was just all coming to a boil. And my brain was like, right now, you have to do this now.
Yeah, I can't
And
hold on to this any longer.
no, no. And that's when I knew that I had to put together a team of people who were going to walk me through this, kind of hold my hand, that I
Mm,
finally needed the help.
mm,
And that is when it all changed for me. I started with my individual therapist, and she was younger than me, like a lot younger than me. And I was like, how could this youngster help me, an older woman, get through this? But I realized that she had so many new therapies, so many new modalities that she had learned that maybe an older therapist may not
Yeah.
understand, right? So I started with her, and I actually went inpatient as well to really get an understanding of what I needed and started group therapies, that kind of thing, and
And at
came
the
across.
time, was that had you been put in therapy as a result of like everything that was happening in the court systems? Or was this your first time really engaging in therapy?
No, when I was younger, my mother made it a priority.
Okay.
And even when I went to college, she said to me, I won't help you unless you're in therapy, which sounds really, really harsh. And it was harsh.
Right.
But in the end, she was right,
Right.
because just the day to day life of being someone who was in trauma for so long
Right.
is difficult.
Yeah. Well,
S-
and it sounds like just to have a place where you were talking with someone where you were seen, even though you had already built some walls up to be like, no, 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 I'm not going here. You at least were establishing a sense of security and a connection, and probably some trauma management at that point, even if you weren't feeling like you were in a state where you were like doing the deep, painful sort of, I talk about like debriding a wound, but at least some like day to day management, which was helpful. So you had that.
Mhm,
And, you know, I think it would sound harsh to someone who's not been on the other side of that. Like I'm sitting here like kudos to mom, where it's like
mhm,
that was probably the only leverage point she had is like, do this. And maybe seeing that if she didn't put you in that position, you wouldn't choose it yourself because you had been trying to be fine or you were trying to just not have this be your identity. And so, okay, so you had that, but it was still, you hadn't done this deeper healing work because again, you still had some walls up. And then you go through this traumatic loss of your business, you're bankrupt, this loss of identity, I think is the key thing you're saying here. And as that comes off, and we see this so much for people when they experience a new trauma, a trigger to an old trauma, or some really major grief and loss, a lot of this stuff comes to the surface because you just in this super high state of reactivity and pain. And so now all this comes up. What I am curious about before you tell us more about the therapeutic process is you made a decision in that moment. I want to get better and I'm going to listen to my body and my brain that's asking me to do this work. How did you make that decision? Because I don't think that that is as easy as it's rolling off the tongue for you now as you're telling us. Like that's a really painful place to be.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. It was really hard. I noticed the change in me, that I couldn't, guard myself against it any longer. That, like you said,
Mm.
the wall that was up crashed and
Mhm.
burned, and my brain just didn't want to work right. And maybe it's not
Mm.
that it didn't work right, it's that it was working right in telling me that I
Yeah.
had to do this work.
Yes. Yes. Mm.
So looking at it that way, my brain finally was just like, you've had too much of this trauma in your life, and you're re traumatizing yourself each time you decide against helping yourself.
Mm. I think that is a really powerful statement because I think that is that. sort of perpetual loss of power when you keep not choosing to do it. And that's not to then, because some people are going to hear this and their shame brain is going to be like, see, so I am shitty because I'm not choosing to do the work. I've been in that position too. Like, knowing we need to do something doesn't translate to being able to do it. There's a very different skill set to get to that point. And so in your case, it was coming to that realization. And it sounds like almost like sort of a desperate attempt of like, I don't want to feel this anymore. I can't keep running. And enough of a sense of self, even if it felt fleeting, to say, I deserve to try something different. And that part is hard to see in the moment. But the fact that you chose it, there's still a glimmer of self love of like, you could choose this thing that's really scary and hard and you don't know what's going to happen, but believing enough that you have a right to try it. And that's, I think, another key point that gets missed for people too. Okay, so coming back into this, you start therapy, you make a decision to go into an inpatient treatment facility, just like really immersing yourself in the work. I'm assuming at some point all of the emotions come to the surface, all of these repressed feelings, whether it's all at once, slow bursts. Walk us through that and how you then got to this place of like, I need more tools and I need more of this and I don't know what to do. And I think the second question being, how did you get to a place where you could trust you wouldn't be stuck in them forever? Because that's so many people's fears, is if they do allow them to come up and they name them, will they ever get through them?
Yeah, well, the fear for me was that I wasn't going to be the person that everyone else needed me to be. And at this point, I was single. So I was a single
Ah.
mom, and my two boys were younger. And,
Mhm.
looking back, because I didn't know anything about internal family systems,
Mhm.
but I do work with them with my therapist. And looking back, I think there was a part of me that told me that I had to do this for my children. Like,
Mm.
that I wasn't going to do it for myself, that I'll do it for my children so that
Mhm.
they can have a mother that can actually cope.
Yeah.
So that fear was always in me, of that's why I was pushing it off and saying not yet, is because the fear was that I was going to break, basically.
Mm.
That I was going
Yeah.
to break and I would become a shell of myself. I'd hide myself
Right.
away. I wouldn't be able to do the things that my children needed me to do. So having that one little person in the back of my mind saying, well, maybe this will be really good for your children. So let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, it totally makes sense on the opposite side of, trying to logic yourself into thinking not dealing with it is going to be better for them, because you're like, I'll be able to do this. And if I go here, like you said, I'm afraid I'll break. I'm afraid I won't get through it. I'm afraid X, Y, and Z. But also, it's going to take time away from them. It's going to take, going to an inpatient facility, going into more intensive therapy. You are leaving that role, and that's scary. And so, I think being able to come on the other side of it and say, well, this isn't working. And I'm starting to witness myself become all of these things I feared. I'm going to become the shell. I'm becoming the person that's reacting. I'm not able to show up the way that I want to. This might be the only other option to try. And I have to be willing to try it. And so you did this. And I think, especially in AA and some other programs, there's this kind of belief that it should always just be for you. My mom used to talk about this a lot when she started her program. I can't get sober for you. I can't do these things. I have to want it for me. That is a very true statement. But in the beginning, when you don't have a sense of self or self love that is rooted and deep enough for you to hold on to, being able to grab, whether it is your kids or a partner or somebody else that you love enough while you're learning how to love yourself to that degree, can be so helpful. And so you use them, it sounds like, as your anchor. You're starting to see all of these things. Okay, keep going.
When I was able to really sit down and learn the techniques that were going to work best for me, and to develop this toolbox that I like to talk about,
Mhm.
this coping skills toolbox. Uh, you know, in hospital, I was introduced to DBT, and I started to truly understand why I was reacting, what I was reacting to,
Mm.
you know, the shame of all of it. That came
Mhm.
crashing down when I
Mhm.
really started doing the work. The shame of, oh, I have to be here now. I
Mm.
have to take care of this now because I've never done it before, or it's not letting me be the person that I want to be or should
Yeah.
be. Shame's such a large part of trauma.
Mhm.
And, specifically, with childhood trauma, with abuse, our
Mhm.
shame comes out in so many forms: body shame, just belief system shame. I was raised Catholic. I had to go to a Catholic school, and the shame of going to church with my abuser and not believing what I'm supposed to believe in this church.
Yeah.
So the belief system's crashing. The idea of me as self crashing. I had to overcome that feeling that I wasn't worthy of
Mm.
feeling good about myself or others feeling good about me.
And was most of what came up for you in the underbelly the shame and the internalization of stuff about you and stories about you and feeling like you were the problem? Or did you also notice, was there an emergence of like anger and resentment and pain directed at others? Or did they maybe both exist sort of simultaneously?
Well, it's interesting. Just as you had said about when you had your daughter,
Mhm.
that the feelings that came up about that, I had a lot of anger because I had two little boys and I had two older brothers. And I would look at these little boys and I would be so angry that somebody would do what my abuser did
Mm.
to these little boys, which were my brothers. So I'm kind
Yeah.
of, seeing how beautiful these boys are and how angry I was at my abuser and my brother's abuser for
Mm.
doing the terrible things that he did to them. So there was
Mhm.
always this underlying anger that I felt.
Did you have anger towards what was done to you too? Or was it more about what was done to these 2 people that you love and care about?
More about them. So all of my life, I've been a caregiver. I was a caregiver as a child to my parents. I was a caregiver to my brothers. My middle brother, he had OCD or has
Mm.
OCD, and I was his protector in that as well. I was a caregiver all along, and it went into all of my relationships, like my husband. I was the caregiver in all of that. He learned that he could be taken care of. And so I always went into my relationships, and I guess also into a mother relationship, as I have to take care of everyone else. This is
Mm.
my duty. This is my job in this universe, is to take
Mhm.
care of others. And it's really hard to break that.
Mhm.
And I was just talking to someone the other day. The relationships that I had after I divorced ended up the same way.
Mhm.
It's always about taking care of them until the point where you're exhausted.
And resentful and burnt out, and you can't.
Yes.
Well, and I
Yes.
think the key thing you just described is you were parentified as a child, put in a position to take care of people that it wasn't your role, concurrently experiencing abuse, which erodes the sense of self and creates confusion in interpersonal relationships and dynamics. And so you had a significant amount of role confusion. You weren't taught what it looks like to have healthy interpersonal dynamics where you can take care of someone, but also still be taken care of and be seen. You were shown what it looks like to bear all the responsibility and then to be put into positions where, even going back to the example with the court system, where then if you were trying to take care of you and speaking up for what happened, you weren't believed or your story was used in service of somebody else and their goals, whether that's the DA, whatever that was. And so even in these moments, there's these subtle and not so subtle ways where you are taught take care of everybody else, protect everybody else, which is even more so why the not yet would come into play. Because if I stop, I can't be in service to everyone else around me. So I need to stuff, run, avoid, suppress. I need to be okay. And my guess is on some level, you also start to have this idea of, not only am I not worthy of being able to fall apart and taking up space, because someone else would have to take care of me, and that's a problem. I can't do that. But you also develop this belief, almost like this sort of fucked up hero complex of like, I can take care of everybody else, so I should. I have to, and I can, and that's my job. So we don't know how to be, in our mind or our perception, when we're very rigid thinking in that, like the weak one, the one with needs, the vulnerable one, we are more comfortable on the other side, which is probably why even in the beginning, it was easier to leverage your boys as motivation because of that caregiver component. But my guess is as we're going through this, you're starting to get to a place where you're realizing, oh, I have to matter too. And I have to not be in a position where I'm constantly taking care of everybody. Because if I do that, even if it feels innocent, and I'm not in a relationship with someone who's emotionally, mentally, sexually, physically abusing me, I'm still creating patterns that will lead to abuse and unhealthy relationship dynamics. So I have to get to a place where I can show up for love and take care of people, but also have expectations and trust that they can take care of me as well. And I can be seen too. And my guess is some of this is where we start to see emotion regulation coming in, because with emotion regulation and dealing with our emotions is also self-trust, a sense of security, and offloading to other people at some points in time. So take us to that part of where then you started to kind of see, okay, the toolbox is really about this. And the toolbox isn't so I can continue to take care of people. The toolbox is so I can also live a life that I can be excited about too. And I get to participate in as well.
Right. And I think that is when I had to learn that my very existence wasn't just for others.
Mm,
My body wasn't even my own. My body was my abuser's.
yes. Yes.
So there was no part of me, no part of my existence that was for me. It was for everybody else in my life. So building up that idea that I exist for me as well was a process.
Yeah.
And is still a process. I am very much still in that space where I have to remind myself that I am also a being in this world that deserves to be able to feel singular.
And to not, I mean, I think particularly when we think about our kids, because that can be a really confusing role for us when we've been in that position of caregiving. And now we have these beings that we are quite literally their caregivers, and we are expected to be parents and to have these things. But there's still a value in being a part of that and to be seen. Like I think about, I definitely had a shame spiral afterwards, but even yesterday, I was emotionally so overwhelmed and in such a state of dysregulation. I needed a break. And I can logically tell you how cool it's going to be when my daughter gets through the other side of this developmental leap.
Mhm.
And the last 48 hours, some of the behaviors that she's had to exhibit in this developmental process fucking suck.
Mhm.
And they're so overwhelming. And I cannot have the 10th conversation about something to only witness her just being, she's not trying to. She doesn't really know what she's doing. She's 4.5, but she's an asshole in the moment. And I am just hurting and mad and disappointed. And I need a break. And then to be able to say I'm allowed to go take a break. I still, again, felt shame afterwards. But me, even 2 years ago, wouldn't have taken the break. Me 2 years ago would have been, you have to stuff that down and keep helping her. At least me now can say, no, I'm allowed to take a break. I'd
Mhm.
like to say me in a year or two from now will be able to say I'm allowed to take a break and I don't have to feel bad about it. I'm not there yet, but I think my guess is that that was a process, and that's going to be that continual tension point because you very real terms have people in your life that need you to take care of them. So how do you do that and then not get pulled into those extremes that were so unhealthy, that which make total sense based on what you went through before, but don't have to be your norm now?
Right. And I think that's where your team comes in. Having people around you who are telling you you matter and you're important.
Mm,
And that's why building a team is so important, is that you have, outside of your family and friends and loved
mhm,
ones, you have a third party who are like, wait a second, but
mhm.
what about you?
Yeah.
And hearing it enough from them to realize, oh yeah, I can sit back and see myself as an individual.
Yeah.
That's when that's when you can start to use the skills that you're learning to regulate
Mm,
yourself and to have a better idea of what will help you cope down the line. Building that toolbox is just so important. And it doesn't matter the tools, it's the tools that work right for you. And you have to
right.
go through a lot of work to figure out which ones those are.
And to not be on that comparison point of, well, this should work for me because it worked for someone else. Even as you said that, I thought about how interesting that whether it's a therapist, a coach, someone else, but as you're talking about building your team, if you're building your team, maybe you have loved ones on that team also. But when you bring on a professional whose job it is to show up for you, there's also healing in the pattern in the way of thinking too, because you are the primary focal point in that relationship, which it's for many people starting therapy, it's the first time that maybe they've experienced that, where they are the subject. Their job is not to, I mean, I would often see this on the other side of like, your job is not to make me okay. Your job is not to get an A plus in therapy because otherwise I'm going to be let down. This is not about me. This is about you and what you need. I work for you. Like you're the leader in the room, not me. And so I think that sort of concurrent building up of allowing yourself to be seen by these professionals can also start to help you imagine a time where maybe you could be seen in these other relationships as well. So you're talking about your toolbox. So I want to bring this up here because yes, I think being able to, reframe my thoughts and use cognitive diffusion and bringing in wise mind, like those are amazing skills and tools. And sometimes all I want to do is punch the fucking wall. I
Yes.
know that I have every one of those tools in my pocket. I've been teaching them for years, but sometimes I am so in that state of emotional reactivity. I do not want to deep breathe and reframe my thoughts. I want to punch the fucking wall.
Hmm.
So, my guess is this is where you created this beautiful product that people can have in their toolbox for the moments that that's all they can access. And the fact that they can know it and then get a tool that can help them do it in a safe way to still help them validate and honor their emotions, and then maybe choose reframing, processing, meditation, whatever the fuck, once they're done with it. That would be key. So tell us about that and how that came to be for you as well.
Sure. I was in a group therapy session and I was really frustrated with my PTSD symptoms. And I said, I wish I had a monster that I could just rip apart and throw across the room, bang against the walls. And people in there were like, yeah, you should have that. And I was like, yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
I went home and I'm not a seamstress or a tailor or anything, but I, put together this ragtag monster plush doll and I made their heads, arm, and legs of Velcro so that I could rip them apart.
Mm.
And I named them PTSD Pete for myself. And I used Pete when I needed him. And, I realized after a while, I was like, if this can help me to get out that big frustration, that physical frustration that I need to get out, maybe it can help others. And, I
Mhm.
started to think about how this could help children. Because I'm looking at this plush doll and I'm like, I could make a doll that looks good for kids, you know?
Mhm.
And so I started work on it, and PTSD became Moody when I started in an accelerator program for entrepreneurs and got together the idea and started testing with kids, with families and therapists and teachers to bring Moody into their realm and see what could happen when you
Mm-hmm.
see your child getting out of control. Because my oldest son had a lot of behavioral issues where I called him my Tasmanian devil, because he'd rip the
Mm-hmm.
place apart, and I'd have to hide his brother sometimes.
Mm.
And, and he'd have that shame spiral after.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I figured, like giving a child a way of letting out that physical energy, that
Mm-hmm.
frustrating energy in this safe way would be great. But what I didn't realize until I really started working with kids is that the best part is to put Moody back together again. So you put
Mm-hmm.
them back together again with an adult and you talk about what happened. What can we do next time to better help you cope with that big frustration that you're having? That's
Mm-hmm.
when I started to see communication between
Mm-hmm.
parents and children,
Yeah.
and parents being able to use Moody to show their children that that's how you can let out this emotion, and to
Mm-hmm.
help the parent to get through their own frustration, because our kids make us mad.
Yeah.
Right? We get upset with our kids when they're upset. So having
And
a
just the caveat to anybody hearing that doesn't make you a shitty parent to just agree
exactly.
that that's true. Like, we can all just
Yep.
say it. Our kids make us mad. That's what it
Mhm.
means to be in a relationship with someone. Sometimes
Right.
they hurt you. Sometimes they piss you off. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's their job.
Yes.
That's They're supposed to do
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
All interpersonal communication causes some sort of emotion to rise up, whether it's positive or negative.
Right.
So our kids can piss us off,
Yeah.
and we need to teach them how to properly let that frustration out. A lot of
Yeah.
therapists will be like, punch a pillow. Well,
Right.
Moody's there to rip apart.
Right.
And I even created a coloring book that went with it. And on one page, it says, don't worry, it doesn't hurt me. So it's giving the
Mm.
kids permission to let
Yeah.
this out. And it was just so important for me to get this out to people who are having that problem with communicating their own feelings as well as understanding their kids.
Yeah, one of the things I think as you're saying that's super important is it's really easy for someone to see a tool like this and to be like, well, this is a kid's tool. It's not. It's a tool for anyone. And I think there's two things that come up that are super important. One, we as adults have the same emotional experience as our kids. We just have decades more either of stories, experiences, maladaptive coping skills, and sometimes insight and, distress tolerance skills. But the feeling is still having the same impact. We just might have a little bit more of a cognitive awareness than maybe my 4.5-year-old does. But the same feeling she has, she's just more impulsive. So she's going to go to the tantrum faster. I still want to go to the fucking tantrum. I just have a few more layers built up until I get there. And so I think it's important to remember that these experiences are universal. They're not age specific.
No.
The ability to maybe regulate ourselves, it's important to remember it's not fair to expect a 4, a 7, a 10-year-old to regulate at the same level that maybe a 40, a 50, or a 60-year-old can.
Mhm.
And to kind of make that more of an equalizer that we all have big feelings and we all have this point where we need to rip, throw, punch, whatever it is. The second piece of that I think is really key, I used to see this a lot when I worked in an adolescent program for kids with eating disorders. And there was oftentimes a lot of trauma and a lot of really intense reactivity. And so if we're not going to have somebody binge and purge or self-harm, the conversation is what else can we do while they're developing some of these other skills for distress tolerance? Because it is not reasonable for you to expect your 12-year-old when they're that elevated to be able to sit down and take a deep breath and process with you all of their feelings. Their brain's not there. It is
No.
in a fight, flight, or freeze state. It is not able to respond. It's reactive in that moment. And there's often a lot of resistance, I think, from parents and caregivers of, well, I don't want to teach my kid violence. So I don't want to teach them to punch a pillow. I don't want to teach them to throw their stuffed animal. I don't want to teach them to do these things. And so resistance to something like Moody, because it's, well, what are we teaching them? That they can rip and break things. The thing I think is really key is we're not teaching them that they can just go rip and punch and hurt anything or anyone they want. We're saying, gosh, sometimes that feeling of frustration, the only way to get it out is through physical movement.
Mhm.
And when you're 4, you're not going to be able to say, I'm going to throw my running shoes on and go for a run, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to take a dance class. You are feeling that feeling in the moment. What I can teach you is, here's how we can deal with it. And here are the specific tools and resources to do that safely. And I love that you did that with Moody, because we're not saying, go do this with anything. We're saying, no, we can't just go destroy property. We can't go make other people feel afraid and scared, and we don't need to hurt our bodies. So let's use this thing. It's like a whisk is meant to whisk.
Mhm.
This is meant to rip. And I think that permission giving can help also alleviate some of the fear that I think parents and caregivers have of, well, what if then they start to do this with other things? No, there's
Right.
still a boundary. So you're validating while boundary setting at the same time. And that piece for adults and kids alike, I think is really incredible.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen so many, different examples of how it's helped not just parents, but also therapists and
Hmm.
teachers. Teachers have put them in their safe space so that a kid can go in and, take anything out on Moody and then able to go back to the class
Yeah.
and settle back in. And therapists use them with parents to kind of be
Hmm.
that, here's Moody's your child. Let's talk through how we're going to communicate with them. So they've been
Mm.
used for so many different ways to help people to understand their own emotions and then communicate them to others.
Yeah. And I like what you said that's really key around the putting him back together and the conversation that comes around that. Because I think one of the key things as we wrap up around emotion regulation, so I often think about sort of the steps of just insight, being able to name our emotions, then it's being able to feel them, and then it's being able to integrate them into the experience and long term be able to allow them to inform but not dictate how we show up. Again, that key piece being when we've never even labeled our emotions before, we're not going to be able to let them inform. We're
Mhm.
still figuring out what they are. We're still going to react. We're still going to have these very maladaptive skills. And so it's a stepwise process. And so as our kids are learning that too, in the beginning, maybe it's they know that they're feeling something, but they don't know what. So
Right.
when that ripping apart, when that throwing happens, you start by practicing, well, what were we feeling? Let's start to talk about that. And then the next part is, gosh, you grabbed this really awesome tool. Let's think about what we could do next time. You used that example earlier of
Yeah.
how could we help you in the future to be able to cope so it doesn't get to this point. And long term, maybe Moody's more of a friend and not necessarily the support in the moment that needs to be ripped apart, but something that can come along. And maybe even those moments when we feel broken and we can be like, gosh, I just don't feel together. It can be this representation of, look how many times Moody has not been together and come back and been okay. And
Yeah.
so that last piece of emotion regulation really being that integration of our emotional experiences and allowing them to, again, inform rather than drive how we show up to our lives, or to be a thing I think that we fear and run from and avoid at all costs.
Yeah.
I talk about a lot on the podcast brain ponds. And so this idea of I want every episode to essentially muck up everybody's brain ponds where they came in, they're like, no, it's fine. And then by the end, they're like, fuck, that's still under there. And I've still got this to deal with. And okay, hopefully with some idea of this is a possible thing and this is something that I can do. And so I'm curious as we wrap up, if you could send listeners away with one next step, if they were going to start with one thing in this journey to emotion regulation and starting to get to a place of peace, what would that one next step be for them?
The understanding that healing is never linear, that it's a
Mm.
roller coaster. And one day you're going to feel really high, and the next day you're going to feel really low, and that's okay. We need to give ourselves grace. We need to understand where we are at, not just physically, but emotionally,
Yeah.
because your emotions change your body,
Yeah.
change the way how you act, the way you cope. So I think it's really important for people to understand and remember this isn't going to be like a straight train. It's going
Right.
to be that roller coaster.
And so now, if people are in that space and they're going, okay, I'm working on my beliefs, I'm starting to create a little bit more buy in, realizing I don't have to be perfect, it is not a linear progression. Jennifer and Kyira are saying we've all got emotions, we've all got shame. Like, this is hard for all of us. Okay, I got it. Now I want to build my team. And I think Jennifer would be a person I want on my team. What is the best way for people to reach out and get in touch with you and or get their hands on their own Moody to bring into their toolbox as well?
My website is mymoodymonster.com, and I just sold out of my Moody's, and I've just ordered another big batch of Moody's to come in, so you can pre-order Moody. I also have a pre-order for a donation, so part of my social mission is getting Moody's to first responders, social workers, and treatment centers for kids who are in trauma. So you can also do that. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on all the social medias, and you can also reach out by jen@mymoodymonster.com.
I love that. And we'll make sure that we have all of that down in the show notes for everyone so that you can reach out and get connected with Jennifer and hopefully get your hands on your own Moody and maybe share one with someone else. Thinking about, I've got a list running in my head of all the places I work with that could definitely use one in their toolboxes as well, and make sure that we're giving kids, adults, and everyone in between the space and place to feel their feelings. Remember, listeners, as you go through any of these episodes, the goal is to bring in that curiosity and that openness and to notice when judgment is coming in to make you feel like you are somehow failing, flailing, not doing it right, and recognizing that we don't need to keep that here. Here, we're just exploring, we're building that curiosity. And like Jennifer said, it is not a linear process to shame resilience, to feeling emotionally validated, seen in a state of the response system where we're not constantly up here. And so just trusting it, allowing that roller coaster to keep moving and to go forward. Until next time, I will see you all then. And Jennifer, thank you so much again for such a wonderful episode.